Oftentimes people attack my religion or belief systems or theology using nothing but science. And more than oftentimes, I'm on the defense, consistently trying to figure out how to defend my religion using the same type of theology and science that they're using. But not often enough do those people get questioned about what they believe. And I'm just a little curious how many of them actually have studied the science of their morality. Now, when I say something like that, a lot of times people, for some reason, believe that science and morality or science and feelings aren't connected. And I don't understand that take because there's a lot of science about our morality and about the feelings that we have. One specific thing I want to talk about, or one specific notion or idea I'd like to talk about, is the idea of free will. I'm consistently surprised to find that most people don't know that there are a lot of physicists or neurologists and definitely philosophers who don't believe that we have free will. And it's interesting to me that they can somehow just write all of this off. Now let me explain. There's a physicist named Sabine Hossenfelder, and she's a German physicist that adamantly believes that we don't have free will. She says, some have tried to define free will by the ability to have done otherwise. So she's saying that some people say, well, we have free will because when I made a decision, there's a chance that I could have made a different decision, right? She says, but that's just empty words. If you did one thing, there is no evidence you could have done something else because, well, you didn't. All of us can look back and say, well, I mean, if I could do that again, I would do it differently. But you didn't do it differently. Why? As far as philosophy goes, and even science, think about the last thing that you did. Mundane thing. Alex O'Connor, who is a philosopher that I really enjoy listening to, has put it this way. When you cross the street or maybe walk your dog or possibly go to the bathroom, what caused you to do that thing? Well, if you wanted to walk the street, maybe it was to get to the store. But why did you want to get to the store? Maybe because you were hungry. Why were you hungry? Because you didn't eat any food. Well, why didn't you eat any food? Because you were busy. What were you busy doing? Working? And this goes back and back and back. Every single choice you could have made was provoked by a different choice that had been made, and this goes all the way back to the Big Bang of your decisions. So the theory is, or at least from Alex O'Connor's view, is if everything's motivated by the past thing that we did all the way to the point of before we were even born, then we're not actually making the decisions, we're being pushed to make decisions based off of a previous something that had an effect on us. Now, if you don't believe in that, you're going to punch holes in that. That's fine. Now, Hossenfelder, she studies quantum mechanics, and I want to get into that before I go into the philosophy side of this. She studies quantum mechanics, and her thing is, now if you know what a study of quantum mechanics are, it's like the study of like the little tiny particles that exist that you can't see. There's often like waves, and there's a lot of, it's like the final frontier of science, I believe. I mean, maybe someone's going to be angry about that definition of it, but her theory, or not theory, she claims this is a proven fact, is that the atoms and neurons in your brain are reacting, and those are what cause you to have thoughts. And then those thoughts provoke an action. But there's something before those thoughts that happens that creates those thoughts. And we don't have any agency or control or free will over those thoughts. And there's nothing we can do. Even if we want to say that we do, we just don't. That's her take. Basically, the brain has all these like particles in them that basically like trigger and fire and bounce off of each other. Those particles, before a thought forms, create thoughts, and those thoughts provoke actions. So we aren't actually deciding in action, and people think that we decide in an action, or we make a thought and decide in action, right? But the science, according to her, is that whatever provokes the thoughts, these thoughts, the quantum mechanics behind thoughts and ideas, or even reactions, happen before we do them. Therefore, they're predetermined. This kind of theory or idea of science is called determinism. Now, You're probably sitting there right now and you're going, this makes no sense. I can do whatever I want to. For example, right? That was weird. I'm sorry, but I can do whatever I want to, right? Now you might think what I just did, the two things where I went whatever and I hit myself in the face, were those things a sign of free will, or was I just provoked to do that because I'm trying to make a point? There's a scientist named Benjamin Libet. Benjamin Libet did this cool study where he put sensors in patients' heads, I guess, or on their heads that could track the electrodes in their brains. And he told these patients to randomly flick their wrist whenever they wanted to. And then they had to keep an eye on a clock, and they had a cool way of noting or writing down how to determine when you had the idea to flick your wrist and when you did it. Now, what Libet realized was that before somebody actually flicked their wrist, before they made the action, there was like a fourth of a second before the action happened that they noted that they wanted to do the action. The craziest part, though, is that the electrodes in the brain lit up a fourth of a second before the fourth of a second before the action. So a fourth of a second before the thought to do the action, right? So there is science behind this. Now, the question is, and I'm speaking strictly to my atheist friends that like to reject and or deny and possibly mock my beliefs because of science, what is the science that you believe in behind the idea of free will? Do you believe we have free will, or do you deny free will? Now, if you're someone that doesn't believe we have free will, then what's the point of mocking someone else's belief system if you don't believe that free will is something that they actually hold or can obtain? And what's the point of mocking anybody, really? Everything can be justified once you've gotten rid of free will. And I know there's a deeper conversation there, but when it comes down to it, I didn't have a choice. Now, why do you feel like you have to be frustrated at somebody who doesn't have a choice? I know I already broke that all down, that one action is going to cause a reaction from you, and you'll probably be frustrated at somebody's beliefs. And I guess you don't have a choice either, right? I just don't understand the actual rationale of being frustrated at somebody's decision to do something when you don't believe in free will. Now, if you reject free will, I'd like to ask you, why do you reject free will? Have you studied the quantum mechanics? Do you study, are you a physicist or a neurologist? Do you know anything about the brainwaves, any electrodes in the mind? And if you don't, then who are you basing this off of? Are you just basing it off of your own ideas and your own intuition? Does that mean anyone can trust anything their own intuition is claiming to be true? And maybe it's not that. Maybe you trust a different scientist. Well, that means you're rejecting another scientist that's doing all of the research off of data. It's kind of interesting. So science is subjective, and maybe not. Maybe I'm dumbing that down too much, which is fine if you want to come against that. But either way, there is science out there that goes against your idea. So if there's science out there that contradicts your idea, why does your science get to contradict my idea? It just seems like it's kind of up in the air. And if you're even heavier on, well, the research I've done on all of this, there's this science that this says this, and this scientist that says that. Well, whenever I do that kind of thing with my religion or my ideas, I go, well, there's an Egyptologist that proclaims this, and there's something, and they say, well, they're biased, or there's smarter Egyptologists, or there's more well-studied. Well, let me list a couple of people that do not believe free will exists. Stephen Hawking, Sam Harris, Albert Einstein. These people were all either skeptical or genuinely, blatantly believed free will didn't exist. Do you believe you're smarter than them? Probably not. So why do you believe free will exists? Now, I don't want to crush anyone's belief in free will. In fact, there's this book, it's called Purpose by Samuel T. Wilkinson, breaks down the idea of free will and why he thinks that it exists. And once again, He's just someone that studies like evolution and science and then presents an idea that makes sense to me. Because guess what? I can slap myself in the face. I'm pretty sure I do have free will. Now, I didn't want to come here to talk about whether or not free will exists. The point I'm trying to make is the science you choose to believe in is completely subjective. And in fact, this physicist that I was talking about, Hassenfelder, she made this video where she was trying to describe why you don't have free will, but why it's okay. At the very beginning of the video, she says, like, if you're watching this video, it's because you've disregarded your personal feelings on this idea and you've come to actually listen to the science. So it seems like some people are willing to disregard their ideas and assume free will exists despite what science says. Does that make you crazy? I certainly do not believe it is. It does, but I do believe there is a lot of subjectivity or a lot of content that can be considered subjective when it presses against your own ideas. It's just that not very many people press against the ideas of those who have an arbitrary belief system based upon science and philosophies of men that they seem to enjoy more than other philosophies. They tend to pick and choose. Which, once again, I don't have a problem with. And I don't think most people really even care about free will. What the argument comes down to, usually, when I talk to people is, without religion, I can still be a good person. So, let's break that down a little bit. What does it mean to be a good person? Well, I've heard it defined to me by people who have left the church, or people who are just atheists, or maybe agnostic. They say, if you can do actions that don't make or don't cause harm to other people, that would be considered a good action. And if you can do those actions consistently, that would make you a good person. Now, you have to understand, most philosophers, if they're actually honest with themselves, can't technically justify objective truth. Therefore, who is good and what is bad? Nobody actually knows. There's not a standard that you can actually push against. But for the subject of the conversation, let's assume that there is objective good and objective bad because we feel it in our hearts. And going off of this idea of, well, if I do something and it doesn't have a negative effect on somebody else, that's considered a good thing. And if I do something that has a negative effect on somebody else, that's considered a bad thing. Let me do a thought experiment with you. Let's say there's somebody working on a house and they are smoking a cigarette. Now, they have that cigarette and they put it down on the ground and they notice something is awry across the yard. So they run across the yard to go fix whatever's awry. Who knows what it is? Maybe a leak in the sprinklers. That cigarette ends up lighting a bush on fire and then lights a house on fire. And the family that, well, you're the person in this, and that person burns everything you have to the ground because they were negligent of the cigarette. Are they considered bad people? Well, I don't think so. First off, the only thing that could have been avoided here was that they didn't forget that the cigarette was where it was. But do we have an option to forget or not forget? I mean, that's the point of forgetting. No one can purposely forget something. So I don't know if it's exactly within your own choice to forget something. It's just something that happens. It's an accident. But they did cause harm to that other family. So are they a bad person because they are forgetful? I don't think so. But say you think they are. Maybe they could have tried harder to remember. Does that mean all people who are forgetful are also bad people? Well, obviously not. People can be forgetful. So is this considered a bad thing? Well, yes, obviously it's a bad thing, but that doesn't define whether or not this person who put the cigarette butt next to the house is actually a bad person, right? And then we have to go down the road of what is considered harmful to other people, and how much do we actually have to give credence to other people's harm. For example, what if I work really hard at my job and I get a promotion, and because I got a promotion, the person that maybe was there that got fired, that I outworked, got fired and lost their job, and now their family is going to suffer a little bit because dad doesn't have a job because this other guy took it. Does that make me a bad person for being a hard worker and achieving a goal that I was looking for? Obviously not. I don't think anyone believes it does make me a bad person, unless I was facetious about it, of course. But I was just working hard trying to provide for my family. So if a bad thing happened to somebody else due to my own actions that were, in this case, on purpose, how can we not say that that is a bad or a good thing, or that I'm a bad or a good person? It seems like I caused somebody else to suffer directly because of a cause that I created, an action that I did. Well, I mean, it's not really my choice that that person didn't work as hard as me, right? Some people would say wrong. At least the person on the other side of that equation is going to look back and say he's a bad person because he was trying to undercut me. Maybe he thinks that I was purposely attacking him. But does that actually make me a bad person? Does that actually make them the victim? Or have I become the victim because I'm working hard and I'm being criticized for my hard work? Once you start cutting down this whole if you do things that don't have a negative effect on somebody else, it's not a very good definition of good and bad. Or, for example, what if a teenager is texting and driving, and because they're texting and driving, they strike a pedestrian while they're in their car, which happens all the time. It's a horrific thing. Does that make that teenager a bad person, even though this is a terrible accident? In fact, it's the type of accident that causes the most distress on the victim. Does that make the driver a bad person because they were negligent while they were texting and driving? Maybe some people start leaning towards yes, it does. But the person driving definitely is going to claim that was just an accident. I'm not a bad person. I just made a mistake. Well, your mistake caused something bad to happen to somebody else. Therefore, you're a bad person, right? Well, I would disagree. I don't think that your mistakes mean that you're bad. So then other people would maybe give a different definition for what is bad and good. Doing something that purposely affects somebody negatively so that you can gain or benefit or whatever it may be. Well, now you're painting Robin Hood as a bad guy, and I think Robin Hood's great. So there's gonna be this is why philosophers exist, right? Because there actually is no definite answer. I can't tell you what good is and what bad is. All I can tell you is the cigarette did burn the house down. The person did get hit by a car. And that is the world we live in. So if there's no real definition for good and bad, and it seems to have an arbitrary idea surrounding the whole thing, how can we justify actually being frustrated at anyone for anything? Or on the flip, how can we justify not being frustrated at everyone for everything? Since good and bad is completely within your own realm of thought and ideas, good and bad only exists in your brain. Everyone else is either good or bad depending on the day that you have, which means you are either evil or not evil depending on your coworker's day or your boss's day or your spouse's day or your children's day, or maybe your sibling's day or your parents' day. You're just bad. Or sometimes you're good. But it doesn't seem like there's actually a pattern that we can follow. So if science is not necessarily reliable even on something that seems so basic and innocent like free will, and philosophy doesn't seem to answer the question of good or evil, and if you find some sort of philosophy that seems to jive with what you believe in better than others, does that mean that you're right and they're wrong? Well, no. I'm pretty sure that's a logical fallacy. Then how can we decide what is right or what is wrong? Now, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I just created a couple of examples that I could easily be like, well, if the person was never smoking a cigarette, the house doesn't burn down. We believe in the word of wisdom. Bingo, bango, bongo. But that's not the route I'm going to take. Actually, I have a different, hopefully, curveball idea for this video, or this rant, or whatever you want to call it. As somebody who claims to be a Christian, it actually doesn't matter the good or the bad done around you. And in some cases, it doesn't matter the good or bad you do. We know, Christ says, only one is good. That's God. I'm not God. So that means I'm not good. Doesn't matter how good I do. I'll always be fallen. I'll always be bad, right? Now, that doesn't feel like a very bright outlook on anything at all either. So I'm not here to actually try to justify what is good and what is bad according to what the Bible says or the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, or some conference talk I read in 1957. I want to talk about what are we supposed to do? What's the law that we live by, regardless of if people do good or bad things? Jesus Christ said, love thy neighbor as thyself. When he said love thy neighbor as thyself, was he talking about my actual neighbor? Obviously not. We know this story. He's talking about Samaritans. But for some reason, we just jump over it. We assume, yeah, Samaritans, sure, I'm sure the people could accept that and just love them instantly. Not that easy. I know plenty of Christians that couldn't even imagine loving and caring for somebody who is in a homosexual relationship. I know plenty of Christians who couldn't even imagine loving or caring for somebody who votes differently than them and has plenty of different beliefs in them. Yet, that is exactly what Christ asks us to do. So let's go back through these scenarios that I have created for you. Because Christ also, along with loving, asks us to do things like pull the beam out of our own eye, or forgive and forget, right? So in these scenarios I've given you, whether you are the person who left the cigarette on the ground that burnt the house, it is your duty and calling as a follower of Christ to forgive those who wouldn't accept that it was just an accident and decide to sue you and try to ruin your life. It's up to you to forgive. Now, if you're the person that got the house burned down, the law of Christ is to forgive and to love, right? And then the conversation gets a little deeper. Well, first with the jobs. If somebody gets hired over me and I'm frustrated because I feel like I was treated poorly or not looked into in a way that I should have been looked into for the job to be able to hold and maintain that position, it is my duty as a Christian to forgive and to love that person, to be proud and happy of them for working hard. If I am the person who got promoted and the person who got demoted is frustrated at me, hates me, sends me hate mail, maybe tells rumors about me that aren't true, it's my duty as a Christian to forgive and to love them. If I am a careless teenager, texting and driving and do something terrible, it is my duty as a Christian to love and forgive those who hate me for ruining them. And then the flip side of that coin, which is hard, but if you've lost a loved one due to somebody else's negligence, according to Christ, it is our duty to love and forgive. If you're a Christian and you have any sort of space online, we seem to get too absorbed with this whole I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm right because of X and you're wrong because of Y. And we've somehow completely forgotten that regardless of if I'm right, or regardless of if you're right, or vice versa, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you're wrong, I need to forgive and love. That's the point. I don't think we have much of another law to live by. Isn't that why Jesus came, to tell us there's all these laws of good things you can do, but you're fallen. You can't be good. So all I ask of you is to come unto me and love your neighbor, even as you love yourself. Give them all of the praise and applause that you would give yourself for doing maybe things that they would do, and be nice to them and love them when they do things that you yourself would even regret doing. I think it's important not to try to justify our truth, but instead love and forgive the truth of someone who might offend us. Thanks for tuning in. Comment and hopefully subscribe. If you have any more questions, or maybe you're frustrated at me, shoot me a message on Instagram or TikTok at the Iron Rodcast. We'll tune in soon.